He found a boy digging through trash for his mom, then took him home without a word. The boy's ribs showed through his too thin shirt. His hands were scraped raw, dirt crusted in the lines of his fingers. He moved with the focus of someone who hadn't eaten in days. Quiet, quick, careful. He picked through broken crates and torn burlap, lifting a spoiled apple to his nose, then dropping it when the stench hit. The wind blew hot and dry, stinging his eyes, whipping grit into his mouth. Dry River wasn't a place for strays. Folks stepped around beggars like they were puddles of spit. The saloon doors banged open every few minutes, boots stomping out liquor and anger. No one looked twice at the child digging through trash like a coyote. No one but the man on the ridge. He sat on a chestnut gelding just outside town, his figure still as stone. Long duster flapping against his boots, brim pulled low over shadowed eyes. The horse shifted, but the man didn't move, just watched. The boy found a crust of bread wedged beneath a whiskey barrel. He brushed off the ants and shoved it in his mouth before anyone could stop him. He didn't even chew, just swallowed. A sharp whistle cut through the alley and the boy flinched. One of the saloon men had seen him, drunk, angry. The boy turned to run but tripped over a rusted bucket. His knees hit hard. The man stumbled toward him, shouting something ugly. That's when the cowboy dismounted. Not fast, not loud, just a boot hitting dirt. Then another, slow, measured steps through the dust. The drunk paused, looked up. The boy blinked against the sun and saw the shadow stretch long behind him. He wasn't alone anymore. The boy scrambled back, heels digging into the dirt, eyes wide with animal fear. He'd learned not to trust hands that reached too fast. Learned that help came with hurt. But the man didn't reach, didn't speak, just walked slow, stopping a few feet away. The drunk cursed, looked between them, then spat into the dust. Something in the cowboy's eyes made him think twice. He muttered something mean under his breath and staggered back inside the saloon, door slamming behind him. The cowboy knelt. Wind tugged at his coat as he eased it from his shoulders, thick wool lined with flannel, worn but warm, and draped it over the boy's trembling form. The coat swallowed him whole. The boy didn't move, just sat there, breath hitching, too stunned to run. Then the man slid an arm beneath his legs, another around his back, and lifted him like he weighed nothing at all. The boy didn't fight, he should have. But something about the way the cowboy held him, careful, like he might break, felt different. No shaking, no yelling, just strength and silence. A boot step, another, then the sway of the horse. The cowboy mounted with the boy still in his arms, guiding the gelding with a nudge of his knees. No reins in hand, no words spoken. The horse obeyed like it knew the way. Behind them, Dry River carried on. Laughter spilled from the saloon, the blacksmith's hammer rang, and the sun baked the dirt to a cracked crust. No one called after them. No one stopped them. The boy peeked from under the coat. The man hadn't looked down once, just kept riding. Dust rose behind them as the town disappeared, and in that strange, quiet rhythm of hoofbeats and wind, the boy closed his eyes. The sun had dipped low by the time they reached the hills. Sagebrush turned silver in the dusk, and the wind shifted colder. The gelding climbed slow, careful on the loose shale, until they crested a ridge where the world opened wide. And there, tucked against the curve of the land, stood a lone cabin. It wasn't much. One chimney, one window lit faint with leftover warmth, smoke curling from the stack, fences long gone to rot, but it stood solid against the wind, and that was enough. The cowboy dismounted first, then lifted the boy down without a word. His coat was still wrapped around him like armor. The boy's legs wobbled but held. Inside, the fire still held a glow. The cowboy tossed on wood until flames caught again. Orange light flickered across worn floorboards and shelves lined with tin cups and old books. The boy didn't speak, just stood there, silent and hollow-eyed, like he might wake up any second and find it all gone. The cowboy pointed to a chair. The boy sat. Beans bubbled on the stove, a heel of cornbread from the morning. The cowboy ladled the food into a tin bowl, handed it to the boy without fanfare. The spoon clinked once against the metal. Then nothing but the sound of eating. Slow, careful. Like the boy didn't quite believe it was real. He didn't ask questions. The man didn't offer any. When the bowl was scraped clean, the cowboy poured water into a basin, set it on the table, and laid a cloth beside it. He didn't gesture, didn't explain. The boy washed his hands. The fire crackled. Outside, night pressed against the window. Inside, the boy curled into a blanket on the floor, and the cowboy sat watching, still and quiet as stone. 3 days passed. The boy didn't speak, and the cowboy didn't force him. They moved through the rhythm of quiet survival. Firewood chopped, stew simmered, boots dried by the hearth. Mornings came slow, with frost on the windowpane and steam curling from tin mugs. Nights settled heavier, full of coyotes howling and wind pressing at the door. The boy watched everything: how the man saddled his horse, how he mended fence wire, chopped onions, stitched a torn saddlebag by firelight. He watched like someone learning the steps of a dance he wasn't sure he'd ever join. He never asked who the man was. The cowboy never offered a name. But he always made sure the boy ate first, always handed over the thickest blanket, always kept the fire going, even in the dead hours before dawn. It was on the third evening, while smoke curled up from the stovepipe and the beans hissed in the pot, that the silence finally cracked. The cowboy set a tin plate in front of the boy, sat down across from him, waited. Then, low and steady, he spoke. "Where's your mama?" The boy didn't look up, just stared at the steam rising from his food. The cowboy didn't repeat the question. A long moment passed. Then, so soft it barely reached across the table, the boy whispered, "Buried." The cowboy nodded once. Didn't ask how, didn't press, just sat back, eyes on the boy, as if weighing something far heavier than grief. Later that night, when the wind rattled the shutters and the fire sank low, the cowboy took down a battered saddlebag from the shelf, opened it slow. Inside, wrapped in faded oilcloth, was a letter, folded neat, edges worn. His hand hovered over it for a long time. Then he closed the bag. Tomorrow they'd ride. The sky was pale with morning when they saddled up. No words spoken, just the creak of leather, the soft snort of the gelding, the boy climbing up behind the cowboy with the ease of someone who had nowhere else to be. They rode south, past the red hills and dry creek beds, through a silence so wide it swallowed the hoofbeats. The boy clung to the man's coat, small hands gripping fabric like it might vanish if he let go. By midday, they came upon a narrow bend in a dry riverbed, only a trickle left, sun-baked and shallow. The cottonwood stood alone, branches bare, bark stripped on one side like it had been struck. The boy tugged the coat. The cowboy slowed. He dismounted first, then reached back to lift the boy down. Together they walked to the edge of the shade. There, half covered in wind-blown dust, lay a small mound of earth. A crude wooden cross jutted from the top, slanted, the name burned in with shaky hands. Clara Bell. The boy knelt, didn't cry, just brushed the sand from the base of the cross like he'd done it before. The cowboy stood a few steps back, hat in hand. He didn't speak, didn't ask, just looked at the grave like it told him everything he needed to know. Beside the cross was a tin button, a ribbon, sun-bleached and curled, a small pile of river stones stacked with quiet care. The boy added another. When he stood, he didn't move toward the horse right away, just looked up at the cowboy, eyes hollow but clear. "She was sick," he said, voice flat. The man nodded. They left the grave the way they found it, but the boy walked a little closer to the cowboy on the way back. The cottonwood's bark was cracked and rough, sun split down one side. Wind tugged at the branches, dry leaves rustling like whispers from the past. The boy stood still beside the grave, eyes on the crooked cross. But the cowboy stepped closer to the tree. He touched it, palm flat against the trunk, fingers spread. Not like a man testing wood, but like someone trying to listen. Carved there near the base, half hidden by sand and time, were words shallowly etched by a dull knife. Clara Bell, beloved mother. The letters were uneven, the spelling clumsy, but the meaning rang clear. Whoever carved it had done so with care, with grief, maybe with shaking hands. The cowboy kept his palm there, eyes closed. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The boy glanced up, watching him. Something about the way the man stood, still, respectful, silent, made his throat tighten. No one had come before. No one had touched that grave like it mattered. Until now. The cowboy finally stepped back, reached into his coat, pulled out a small pocket knife, and crouched low beside the tree. Below the first carving, he added something new, just one word. Micah. He didn't look at the boy as he carved it, just worked slow, steady, careful not to split the wood. When he was done, he wiped the blade on his sleeve and stood. The boy moved closer, reading the name. His name. On the same tree as hers. He blinked hard, but no tears came. Not yet. The cowboy didn't explain, didn't ask permission. He just placed one calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. Micah didn't flinch. The wind picked up, scattering dust across the grave, but the names on the bark held fast. 2 lives marked now, rooted in the same soil. The ride back was quiet. The boy leaned into the cowboy's back, not sleeping, just still. The sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the plain. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off, but the cabin came into view before darkness fully took the land. Inside, the fire had died to embers. The cowboy restoked it without a word. The boy didn't move, didn't ask. He stepped out of the borrowed boots at the door, laid the coat across the chair like it belonged to him, then settled onto the worn buffalo hide near the hearth. No words, no tears, just the sound of flames finding life again. The cowboy set stew to warm and moved about the room with the quiet surety of someone used to silence. He didn't speak to fill it, just let it stretch around them like an old quilt. The boy watched the fire, hands tucked under his chin, not quite asleep, not quite awake. He didn't fidget, didn't ask about tomorrow. He just stayed there, small and still, like maybe he'd always been part of the room. The cowboy placed a bowl beside him. The boy sat up, ate without looking up, then lay back down when it was done. No thank you. No questions. The cowboy didn't expect either. Later, when the wind picked up outside and rattled the shutters, the boy didn't flinch, just curled tighter, eyes half-lidded, his breath slow and quiet. He didn't cry, not when he'd pointed to the grave, not when the man carved his name into the tree, not now, surrounded by warmth he hadn't asked for. The cowboy watched from the table, his coffee cooling untouched. It was grief, maybe, or something deeper. Not all wounds bleed. Some just go quiet. The wind howled outside, dragging dust across the hills like a warning that came too late. Inside, the fire popped low. The boy was asleep, curled tight under the wool blanket, one hand resting near the hearth, the other clutching nothing, like he'd once held something precious and forgot it was gone. The cowboy sat at the table, the saddlebag laid out in front of him. The leather was cracked, worn smooth at the seams from miles ridden and years forgotten. He opened it slow, pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. The letter inside was yellowed, the folds soft from being opened too many times. Ink bled in places where water or tears had touched it. He read it again. Eli, it began, I wouldn't ask if I had anywhere left to turn. He's sick again, and I can't keep up. I'm working nights at the laundry, but the fever keeps coming back. I don't know what else to do. If you ever meant what you said, please come. We're in Dry River. He keeps asking for you. I just want him safe. Please. It wasn't dated, but the postmark said 2 weeks before he'd arrived. 2 weeks. He folded the letter back up with hands that looked steadier than they felt, tied the twine, slid it back into the saddlebag, and closed the flap. He hadn't known. Or maybe he had, and just didn't ride fast enough. The boy stirred in his sleep, murmured something that never made it into words. The cowboy looked over, eyes dark beneath the shadow of his brow. He came too late for Clara, but not for the boy. That was the part that still mattered. The next morning, the cowboy stepped out before the sun crested the ridge. Frost bit at the earth, and his breath fogged in the still air. He hauled lumber from the lean-to, rough pine boards dragged through the cold, then set to work beside the cabin wall with hammer and saw. Inside, the boy sat by the hearth, watching the door. He didn't ask where the man had gone, didn't speak at all, just sat wrapped in the big wool coat, knees to his chest, listening to the rhythm of work outside. Wood hitting wood, nails driven home, the slow scrape of blade carving grain. By midday, it was done. The cowboy brought it in, simple, sturdy, built low to the ground, like for someone small but not fragile. He placed it near the fire, beside the woven rug. Then, without a word, he knelt and ran the back of his knife along the headboard. It wasn't pretty, but it was clear. Micah. The boy looked up, eyes wide, a question forming on his lips. But he didn't ask how the man knew. Truth was, no one had said. Not the boy, not the letter. But the name had sat heavy in the cowboy's chest from the moment he'd seen the grave, as if it had waited years to be spoken aloud. The boy walked over, slow, like it might vanish if he got too close. He ran his fingers across the letters, just once, then climbed into the bed and lay on his side, one arm curled under his head. He didn't say thank you, didn't need to. The fire crackled. Dust shifted at the windowsill. The man returned to his chair, poured coffee into a chipped tin mug, and in the quiet, something settled between them, like belonging. The cowboy came into town once a week, same as always. Supplies, ammunition, coffee beans. He said little, nodded once to the clerk, paid in silver, and left without lingering. But this time, he wasn't alone. The boy sat on the bench outside the general store, legs swinging over the dust, that same oversized coat still wrapped around him. He didn't speak to anyone, just watched the wind tug at laundry lines and listened to horses clop past on the street. By midday, the whispers had started. "That Eli Callahan?" someone muttered near the post office. "Ain't seen him with a soul in years." "Heard the boy's Clara Bells," said another, voice low. "She came through here near starved last fall. Had a shiner on her face and a baby on her hip. Ran from someone back east, they said. Husband, maybe. Or worse." "Buried out near the dry bend," the barber said, spitting into the dirt. "No preacher. Just a wooden cross." The stories twisted quick, as they always did in places where days stretched long and folks needed something to chew on besides dust. Some said Clara had been Eli's sweetheart once. Others swore she was nothing but trouble, dragged that poor boy all the way west just to die on him. One woman near the mercantile crossed herself and muttered, "Illegitimate," under her breath. The boy didn't hear, or maybe he did and just didn't show it. Inside, Eli packed flour into his saddlebag. His jaw was set. He'd heard too. On the ride home, neither spoke. But that night, after supper, Eli added another log to the fire, then reached into the shelf and handed the boy a book. Micah took it without a word. Sometimes you answered talk by doing nothing at all, and letting the quiet speak louder. Late afternoon, the dust started rising on the trail below the ridge. Not wind, not cattle. A single rider. Steady, intent, the kind of approach that didn't wander, didn't visit for the sake of company. The cowboy stood on the porch, coffee in hand, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't move, just watched the figure grow closer, silhouette sharp against the sinking sun. The boy peeked from the cabin window, then disappeared back into the shadows. The rider dismounted slow, boots landing hard. Star glinted on his chest. Sheriff Amos Dyer, a man who didn't care for gossip but always listened. He nodded once. Eli. The cowboy didn't return the greeting, just set the tin cup on the porch rail, hand drifting near the worn leather of his holster. Not threatening, just ready. The sheriff glanced toward the cabin, then back. "Boy's been seen in town. Folks are wondering." Eli didn't answer. "Some say he's Clara Bells." Still nothing. Sheriff Dyer shifted. "You planning on keeping him?" A beat passed, then two. The cowboy's eyes never left the sheriff's. "He's here," Eli said, voice dry as the land. "Ain't nobody else coming." The sheriff studied him, chewing on the edge of his mustache. "You got no paper, no kinship claim, not even a preacher's word." "I got his name carved in pine," Eli said, "and bread in his belly. That enough?" Dyer let out a breath. "You always were a hard man to pin down." "Good," Eli said, voice flat. They stood there, two relics of old rules, until the sheriff finally tipped his hat and turned back toward his horse. "No law against raising a boy," he muttered as he mounted. "Just better do it right." Eli watched him ride off, then stepped back inside. Micah was still waiting by the fire. The sky was wide and clean that morning, stretched pale blue over the hills. Snow had melted down to patches, leaving the fields soft and muddy. Eli had been up since before dawn, mending a gate that wouldn't stay shut, while Micah sat perched on the fence rail, legs swinging slow, coat sleeves still too long. Across the pasture, one of the mares gave birth overnight. The foal was a wobbling thing, legs too long, head too big, coat slicked down in uneven patches. It stood on its own for the first time, then promptly collapsed into the mud. Micah's shoulders bounced. Then came a sound Eli hadn't heard once since he brought the boy home. Laughter, light, quick, like it surprised him just coming out. He slapped a hand over his mouth like he wasn't sure it was allowed. Eli didn't react, didn't move from where he stood fixing the hinge. Just kept his head down, but his eyes, those gave him away. Softer now, not quite smiling, but close. Micah laughed again as the foal gave another try, legs flailing, mud flying, then finally found its balance, tottering toward its mother. He looked toward Eli as if to share the moment, unsure if he'd done something wrong. But Eli just wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "Come help me with this rail." Micah jumped down, still grinning. He picked up a hammer without being told and handed it over like it was normal, like this had always been his place. No mention of the laugh, no praise, just the creak of wood and wind through dry grass. But something had shifted. Not loud, not sudden, just a small sound that meant the world wasn't as heavy as it had been the day before. He rode in on a black horse, dust-coated and hollow-eyed, with a scattergun tied to his saddle and the kind of silence that made dogs bristle. Folks in Dry River had seen his kind before. Too many pistols, not enough conscience. He didn't drink, didn't talk, just tied up outside the saloon and asked one question. "You seen a boy about 8, name's Micah." The bartender gave a grunt, then a glance to the sheriff's office. By sundown, word had spread. A stranger with a bounty slip and a whisper of back east trouble. Said someone still living wanted the boy returned. Claimed blood ties and legal claim, though no one knew from where or why. Sheriff Dyer sat stiff behind his desk, arms crossed as the man unfolded a folded poster and laid it flat. The paper was worn. The name was inked hard. Micah Bell. No photo. Just a name. A price. "He ain't lost," the sheriff said coldly. "He's with Eli Callahan." The bounty hunter didn't blink. "I don't much care who he's with. Man who paid me says the boy's his. Wants him back. Paid plenty to make sure." "Boy's mother buried herself near a dry riverbed," Dyer said. "Ain't no judge west of the Mississippi gonna hand him over to a man who never came looking till coin was involved." The bounty hunter smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ain't about law. It's about who's got the grit to hold on." That night, the stranger left town, headed north, and the next morning, Eli stood at the edge of his porch, rifle in hand, scanning the ridgeline. Inside, Micah watched him. Quiet, unmoving. The past had found them, but it wasn't done fighting yet. It started with smoke. Thin at first, sneaking beneath the door like a warning too late to heed. By the time Eli kicked it open, the porch was already swallowed in orange glow. Flames clawed up the walls, snapping dry wood like kindling. Somewhere outside, the horse screamed. Micah was inside. Eli didn't shout, didn't waste breath, just pulled his bandana over his mouth and pushed through the smoke. The heat hit like a hammer. Floorboards cracked, rafters groaned, sparks rained down from the ceiling as he stepped over the fallen beam and called the boy's name once. Loud, clear, steady. No answer. Then, a cough. To the right, near the cot. He found Micah curled behind the table, arms over his head, eyes wide and wild. Eli reached down, hauled him into his arms, like he'd done that first night in Dry River. The boy clung tight, no questions. The back wall blew inward. He didn't look, didn't stop, just charged through the smoke and heat, boot heels crunch. The smoke had long cleared, but the scent of ash still clung to everything. The blankets, the porchwood, Eli's coat. What was left of the cabin stood scorched and hollow. The roof gone, walls blackened. The boy's bed, the name carved into the pine, now a charred line in the dirt. They slept in the barn that night. Eli had dragged the mattress from the bunkhouse, laid it beside the hayloft. The firelight flickered from a lantern hung low on a nail. The horses shifted in their stalls, uneasy with the lingering scent of gunpowder and smoke. Micah lay beside him, still wrapped in the coat. He hadn't cried, not when the flames roared, not when Eli burst through them, blood dripping from his scalp, shouting his name through the blaze, not even when the roof gave way behind them, and Eli threw his body over the boys without thinking. He hadn't said a word, not during, not after, until now. Eli was sitting upright, sharpening his knife out of habit more than need. His hands trembled once, just barely, before he stilled them. The boy shifted behind him, sat up. Small breath. Then, "Pa." It wasn't loud, just a breath pressed into a single syllable. Eli stopped sharpening. He didn't turn right away, just sat there, head bowed, the blade still in his lap. Then he looked back. Micah's face was steady, not afraid, not unsure. The word hung between them like a prayer answered too late. Eli reached out, rested a hand on the boy's head. Didn't speak, didn't have to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Snow melted slow that year, but when it went all at once, rushing off the hills like a promise kept too long. The grass came up green and stubborn. Wildflowers dotted the fence line. The air smelled clean again, alive. The cabin had been rebuilt by hand. Every beam hauled from the mill, every nail driven by Eli and the boy who now followed him without needing to be asked. Micah worked quiet, steady, learned fast, carried his own weight. And when the last plank was set, Eli carved the sign. He hung it just before sundown, right above the door, where the light caught it best. Micah and Eli Callahan, ranchers. The letters were deep and sure, no guesswork, no apologies. When they rode into town the next Saturday, no one whispered. The barber tipped his hat. The shopkeeper called the boy by name. Even Sheriff Dyer paused outside his office, long enough to nod once, firm. Nobody asked questions anymore. They saw the way Micah stuck close, how his boots were dusted the same as Eli's, how he reached for tools like he'd been raised to use them. Family didn't always come by blood. Sometimes it came through fire, through silence, through staying when it would have been easier to walk away. At the end of the day, back on the porch, Micah looked up at the sign and smiled. Just a little. Eli saw it, said nothing. But when he brought out 2 mugs instead of 1 and set them side by side on the rail, Micah didn't wait to be told which was his. He just reached for the one on the left. Same as his name now, etched deep, permanent, Callahan,